He was just 15 years old when he died, but in less than 2 decades, his legacy would ripple across the entire Catholic Church and the internet. His name, Carlo Acutis. Born in 1991, raised in Milan, Italy, he was the kind of teenager you wouldn't expect to become a global icon for holiness. He liked video games, he played soccer, he loved computers, but there was something about him that stood out, even from a young age. Carlo had a deep, quiet love for Jesus. From the age of 7, he started going to daily mass. He prayed the rosary every single day. And unlike most kids his age, he wasn't just following along because someone told him to. He was drawn to it, voluntarily, joyfully, even when nobody was watching. He once said, "The Eucharist is my highway to heaven." And he lived like he believed that. By the time he was a teenager, he wasn't just practicing the faith, he was evangelizing. But not in the way most people expect. He wasn't preaching on a street corner. He wasn't handing out tracts. He used the internet. Carlo learned to code by himself. He mastered HTML, Java, databases, and used it to create a website cataloging Eucharistic miracles from around the world. He wasn't trying to go viral. He wasn't trying to be famous. He just wanted people to see that the real presence of Jesus, body, blood, soul, and divinity, was real and happening all over the world. At the time, it didn't seem like a big deal. But years later, that site would go on to be translated into multiple languages and inspire tens of thousands of Eucharistic exhibits across the globe. Carlo once said, "People waste so much time on pointless things, but not me. I don't want to waste even a minute of my life." He didn't. He couldn't, because time was running out. In 2006, out of nowhere, Carlo got sick. What started as fatigue quickly turned into a diagnosis, acute promyelocytic leukemia, one of the most aggressive forms of cancer. He was only 15. But what shocked people wasn't the diagnosis. It was how he responded. Carlo didn't panic. He didn't spiral into despair. Instead, he did what saints do. He offered it up. Every moment of pain, every hospital stay, every needle, every transfusion, for the Pope and for the Church. Even as he faced death, he was calm, peaceful, hopeful. He told his mother, "I'm happy to die because I've lived my life without wasting a minute doing things that wouldn't have pleased God." And then, just days after being diagnosed, Carlo Acutis died on October 12, 2006. His family was devastated, but soon after the stories began pouring in. People who knew him spoke of how he had consoled others even while he was sick, how he had stood up for bullied classmates, how he would visit the homeless with his parents, how he refused to buy anything he didn't truly need, and donated whatever he could to those with less. One local poor man Carlo often helped out had this to say: "He'd bring me food, yes, but more than that, he'd sit, he'd talk, he'd listen." Carlo's holiness wasn't flashy. It was quiet, real, lived in the ordinary. And now that he was gone, people started realizing what they had seen. This boy wasn't just devout, he was different. He had something the rest of the world was missing. And his story was just beginning. It didn't take long for the word to spread. A young teenager who loved PlayStation and pasta, who built websites about Jesus, who gave everything he had, including his death, for the Church. Carlo's cause for beatification opened in 2013, just 7 years after his death. And by 2018, the Vatican had granted him the title of Venerable. Then came the miracle. In Brazil, a young boy suffering from a rare pancreatic condition was miraculously healed after touching a relic of Carlo's clothing and praying for his intercession. Doctors had no explanation. The healing was immediate, verified, complete. The Church launched an investigation, and in 2020, Pope Francis approved the miracle, officially making Carlo blessed Carlo Acutis. But this is where things took a dramatic turn online. When Carlo's body was exhumed in 2019, ahead of his beatification, images surfaced showing his body on display in a glass coffin in Assisi, and people lost their minds. He looked alive, not decomposed, not skeletal, just resting, wearing his jeans, hoodie, and Nikes, exactly how he dressed in real life. Folded hands, serene face, almost like he had just fallen asleep. TikTok started going viral. YouTube clips racked up millions of views. People were claiming it was a miracle, that his body was incorrupt, preserved miraculously by God, a sign of his sanctity. But was it true? Not exactly. When footage of Carlo's body hit the internet, reactions were split into two extremes. Some were convinced it was a miracle, that this teenager's body had never decayed, despite being buried for over a decade. Others called it a hoax, accusing the church of staging a fake miracle using a wax statue. So which was it? The truth is more grounded and more fascinating. When Carlo's tomb was opened in 2019, church officials carefully documented the state of his remains. Contrary to what many believed, they made it very clear. Carlo Acutis' body was not incorrupt. He had undergone normal decomposition. His body, like any other, had changed with time. What was found was his skeleton, intact, respectfully preserved, but not miraculously untouched. So why did he look so lifelike in those photos? Because what the public saw wasn't an untouched corpse, it was a reconstruction. Specifically, his real skeleton was placed in a custom coffin. He was dressed in his signature hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, the same outfit he wore regularly. His face and hands were covered with a silicone mask, sculpted to resemble what he looked like in life. And again, this isn't deception, it's tradition. The church has used facial masks for saints and blesseds for centuries, including Saint Bernadette of Lourdes, Saint John Vianney, and others. The purpose is not to fake miracles, but to preserve dignity and help the faithful connect visually during veneration. Cardinal Sorrentino, who oversaw the exhumation, said plainly, "Today we see him again in his mortal body, a body that has passed through death but is destined for resurrection. The mortal remains were recomposed with dignity for veneration, although not incorrupt." So no, Carlo was not incorrupt. But yes, those are his real bones, respectfully displayed. And honestly, it makes his sanctity even more powerful. Because it wasn't about his death, it was about his life. This confusion isn't new. For centuries, Catholics and even non-Catholics have been fascinated by the idea of incorrupt bodies. When we hear the term incorruptible, we imagine something supernatural, a body that never decays, that looks the same decades or even centuries after death. And in a few rare cases that has happened, as saints like Saint Bernadette or Saint Catherine of Bologna are known for having bodies that remain remarkably preserved without embalming. Their skin remains soft, their features intact. No scientific explanation has ever fully accounted for it. But these cases are rare, and the Church is very cautious. The Catholic Church does not declare incorruptibility as proof of sainthood. It may be a sign, it may be a blessing, but it's never required. And in Carlo's case, they were quick to clarify that his preservation was natural, not miraculous. And honestly, that's the beauty of it. Carlo doesn't need a miraculous body to prove he was holy. His sanctity is in how he lived, in how he served the poor, in how he evangelized the internet, in how he offered up his suffering with joy. His body may not be incorrupt, but his soul was spotless. And in the eyes of the Church, that's what matters most. For some people, seeing bodies in glass coffins is uncomfortable, even strange. They wonder, why does the Catholic Church put these remains on display? Isn't that morbid? But the answer lies in Catholic tradition and theology. The Church teaches that the body is not just a container for the soul, it's sacred. It's part of who we are. And when someone lives a life of heroic virtue, like the saints, their bodies become relics, physical reminders of a spiritual reality. Throughout history, the Church has preserved the bodies of saints not to worship them, but to honor their lives. Their remains become touch points for prayer, inspiration, and often miracles. And in Carlo's case, displaying his body, even reconstructed, is a way to invite pilgrims to reflect, to see a teenager who looked like them, dressed like them, played games like them, and yet lived a life radically focused on God. When you look into that glass coffin, you're not supposed to marvel at the preservation. You're supposed to ask, what did he live for? What do I live for? That's the point. Because one day we'll all end up in a coffin, and what matters most won't be how fresh our skin looks, but what we did with the time we were given. And Carlo didn't waste a single minute. When people talk about Blessed Carlo Acutis, one thing keeps coming up, his passion for the Eucharist. It wasn't just a weekly ritual for him. It wasn't just tradition. It was everything. He once said, "The Eucharist is my highway to heaven." He meant it. While other kids were talking about parties or celebrities, Carlo was busy building an online exhibit that would shock the world. Not because of the tech behind it, but because of the truth it revealed. Starting at just 11 years old, Carlo began to collect documentation of Eucharistic miracles. These are supernatural events where the consecrated host, the bread that Catholics believe becomes the body of Christ during Mass, manifests something visibly divine. In some cases, the host would start to bleed. In others, it would turn into human tissue, later confirmed by scientists to be heart muscle. These events were investigated, documented, and recognized by the Church. But many people had no idea they existed. Carlo wanted to change that. So he took it upon himself to gather over 100 Eucharistic miracles from all over the world, from Italy, Poland, India, Argentina, Mexico, and beyond. He created a digital archive, complete with images, eyewitness accounts, and scientific analysis. He built the website himself. No help, no team, just Carlo, his keyboard, and his love for Jesus and the Eucharist. He launched the site in 2005. By 2006, the year he died, the exhibit had already gone viral in Catholic circles. Today, that same exhibition has traveled to every continent. Over 10,000 parishes have hosted it. It's been translated into more than 15 languages. And the best part? He didn't do it for attention. He didn't do it to build a platform. He did it because he believed the world needed to see the truth. The truth that Jesus isn't just an idea. He's real, he's present, and he's waiting for us in every tabernacle of the world. In a lot of ways, Carlo was ahead of his time. Most people didn't understand what he was doing, building websites, sharing religious content, blending digital tools with ancient Catholic tradition. But today, he looks like a genius. That's why in 2020, when Pope Francis beatified him, he gave Carlo a title no other blessed has ever held. Patron of the Internet. Think about that. The Internet, something known for chaos, distraction, scandal, and addiction, now has a blessed teenager watching over it. Someone who didn't run from technology, but redeemed it. Carlo used the same tools most teens waste hours on, but he used them to evangelize, to educate, to build something lasting. He saw the Internet as a gift, not a curse. He once said, "The Internet is a great tool for sharing the gospel. If we use it wrongly, it can destroy us. But if we use it for good, it becomes a highway to heaven." Carlo understood what most adults still struggle with. It's not about throwing away your phone. It's not about rejecting modern life. It's about sanctifying it. That's why people today, especially young Catholics, look to him as a role model, because he proves that you can be modern and holy, tech-savvy and devout, online and still focused on heaven. He's the saint for the smartphone generation. And he didn't need to live into adulthood to prove it. Since his beatification in 2020, Carlo's story has exploded. His exhibit has reached nearly every country. His relics have been brought to youth conferences, cathedrals, and small rural churches. His story has inspired documentaries, songs, paintings, and prayer groups. But more than that, his intercession is changing lives. In the Philippines, a young man battling depression said he experienced complete peace for the first time after praying before Carlo's relic. In Mexico, a girl who struggled with addiction said it was Carlo's story that gave her the courage to return to the sacraments. And it's not just the sick or desperate. Parents are naming their children after him. Confirmation candidates are choosing Carlo as their patron. Computer programmers are hanging his image near their desks. People are learning to pray the rosary because he did. His example is proving one thing. Sanctity is possible, even now, even here. In a world full of scandals, hypocrisy, and doubt, Carlo's life is like a fresh breeze, a reminder that holiness doesn't require fame, wealth, or even age. It just requires yes. A daily yes to God, a quiet yes to prayer, a joyful yes to service. And that's why people from every background, rich, poor, young, old, devout, struggling, are finding hope in Carlo's story. Because it's real, because it's simple, because it's possible. Across the globe, many Catholics, even practicing ones, have started to drift from belief in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. Surveys in recent years show that more than half of self-identified Catholics either doubt or misunderstand this central teaching. The Church teaches and has always taught that at every Mass, the bread and wine become the body and blood of Jesus Christ. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, but truly, substantially, really. But belief in that truth has been fading. That's where Carlo's mission becomes more than just inspiring. It becomes prophetic. In a world growing numb to mystery, Carlo dragged the spotlight back to the Eucharist. Not with a viral stunt, not with flashy charisma, but with simple, steady, fact-based devotion. His website wasn't emotional manipulation. It wasn't even all that graphically designed. But it had truth. Verified miracles, church-approved events, hard science combined with sacred theology. And that spoke volumes. In 2010, just before his beatification, Carlo's Eucharistic exhibit was requested by bishops across Latin America, Europe, and Asia. And in the United States, it began spreading rapidly across dioceses, from New York to Texas, from small parishes to massive cathedrals. It lit a fire. And that's no coincidence. The Church, even at the highest levels, is now engaged in what's being called the Eucharistic revival, a global movement to bring people back to the source and summit of the Catholic faith. And right at the heart of it, a boy with a laptop, a hoodie, and a deep love for Jesus. Carlo didn't start a revival by accident. He started it by design, because he knew what the world had forgotten. That without the Eucharist, there is no church. And without the church, the world loses its soul. It would be easy to turn Carlo into just another youth saint poster boy, a smiling face on a pamphlet, a neat, tidy example that says, "See, be good like this kid." But Carlo was so much more than a nice story. He was sharp, he was joyful, but he was also radical. He once said, "All people are born as originals, but many die as photocopies." That wasn't just poetic, it was personal. Carlo saw what was happening around him. Young people chasing likes, status, identity, clout, and he called it what it was: emptiness. People trying to copy the world instead of following Christ. And he rejected it. He made small choices every day that added up. Choosing not to gossip, choosing not to binge hours of pointless content, choosing to give his money to the poor instead of buying another gadget, choosing to spend time with the lonely instead of chasing popularity. He wasn't weird, he wasn't preachy, he was just different in the way that saints are. And because of that, his life speaks louder than his death. He didn't just tell people to be good. He showed them how. He wasn't famous during his life. He wasn't trending. But now his example is changing the world because it proves that sainthood isn't just possible. It's urgent. We live in a time of crisis, not just political or economic, but spiritual. People feel disconnected, isolated, bombarded by noise, swamped in content but starving for truth. And worst of all, many feel like holiness is a lost cause, like faith is outdated, like virtue is impossible. That's why Carlo's story is more than just touching. It's timely. He shows us that the ordinary can be holy, that the internet, the very place we often escape into, can become a mission field. That youth is not a barrier to grace. It's fertile soil for sainthood. And above all, he reminds us that Jesus in the Eucharist is not an idea. He is a person, alive, real, with us, every day in every church, waiting, loving, giving. Carlo's legacy isn't in how he died. It's in how he lived and how he pointed everything back to that simple truth. He once wrote, "We are all expected to achieve sainthood. It is not an impossible goal. It is our destiny." For him, that wasn't motivational fluff. That was the gospel. And he lived like it mattered. In a world of filters, fakes, and distractions, Carlo Acutis is the real thing. And he's not done yet. On October 10, 2020, Carlo Acutis was officially beatified in Assisi, Italy, the same city that inspired one of his favorite saints, Saint Francis. Thousands gathered, many more watched online. The images of a teenager in sneakers becoming one step away from canonized sainthood were broadcast worldwide. And in that moment, something historic happened. For the first time, the church placed a modern-dressed teenager with a website portfolio into the global spotlight of holiness. A blessed who didn't live in a monastery. A blessed who wasn't a martyr, a nun, or a priest. Carlo represented a new kind of witness, not new in faith, but new in context. And since that beatification, his story hasn't slowed down. It's exploded. His tomb in Assisi has become a major pilgrimage site. Catholics and even non-Catholics from all over the world now travel to see his resting place, to pray, to seek intercession, and to find inspiration in his life. And they don't leave empty-handed. Since his beatification, stories of miraculous healings and answered prayers connected to Carlo have continued to surface. While only one officially verified miracle is needed for beatification, a second miracle is required for canonization, and the church is watching closely. Among the reports, a girl in the U.S. born with a rare genetic condition showed signs of improvement after a prayer group invoked Carlo's intercession. A seminarian in Africa testified that Carlo's story led him to overcome serious doubts and recommit to his vocation. A woman in Spain said she was healed from severe anxiety after a pilgrimage to Assisi, during which she prayed in front of Carlo's glass tomb. And across social media, thousands are sharing private testimonies. Some speak of mental peace, others of physical recovery, some of renewed faith after years of doubt. What ties them all together is a sense that Carlo's presence, his story, his intercession, has a unique spiritual weight. He may not be canonized yet, but in the hearts of millions, he's already a saint. But this isn't just about miracles, it's about movement. Carlo Acutis is more than a modern saint. He's the saint this generation needs. We live in a time when young people are drowning in screens, bombarded by images, and often misled by influencers who offer nothing but noise. But here was a kid who used those same tools, screens, websites, video editing, to glorify God. He turned tech into testimony. He used code as a form of catechesis. He made the Eucharist go viral before TikTok even existed. That's why today youth ministries across the globe are choosing Carlo as their patron. Dioceses are building retreats around his exhibits, and Catholic developers are building apps in his name to teach kids the faith. He's not a relic of the past, he's a roadmap for the future. And what makes him powerful is how normal he was. He had fun, he liked animals, he loved food, he smiled constantly. But beneath all that was a burning love for Jesus that shaped every decision he made. He's proof that sanctity doesn't have to be weird. You don't have to live in a desert. You don't have to be martyred. You just have to love God with your whole heart, even online. And Carlo did. After being declared blessed, there's only one more step before Carlo Acutis can officially be declared a saint: canonization. To get there, the Church requires a second miracle, something verifiable, medically inexplicable, and directly attributed to his intercession. But here's the thing. The process isn't just about counting miracles. It's also about studying his writings, his daily habits, his personal life, and the spiritual fruit of his devotion. And the Vatican takes this seriously. Carlo's journals, personal notes, school assignments, and even casual emails have been reviewed by theologians and historians. His life has been put under a microscope, not to find faults, but to ensure that his virtue was real, consistent, and heroic. So far, everything confirms what those who knew him already believed. His life was filled with charity toward the poor and marginalized. He was humble in his successes and patient in his suffering. He was a servant of truth, online and offline. The Church doesn't rush canonizations, but in Carlo's case, many believe it's only a matter of time. Because if holiness can look like a kid in sneakers with a PlayStation controller and a Eucharistic website, then he's the real deal. And that second miracle, it might already be on its way. There are two ways to leave a legacy: make noise while you're alive, or plant seeds that bloom after you're gone. Carlo didn't care about noise. He planted seeds. And now those seeds are becoming trees in parishes, in youth groups, in classrooms, in hearts. There are kids learning to code, not just to build games, but to build faith websites, because he did it first. There are teens going to daily mass, not because they were forced to, but because they saw Carlo doing it joyfully. There are entire youth movements, from India to Ireland, that cite Carlo Acutis as their inspiration. And even secular outlets, journalists, educators, podcasters, are talking about him as a bridge between tradition and technology, faith and modernity, heaven and earth. Carlo Acutis is already shaping the next generation of Catholicism. And he's doing it without ever having posted a single TikTok, made a single YouTube video, or gone live on Twitch, because his witness speaks louder than any algorithm. When you think about it, Carlo Acutis' entire life was an upload, not in the digital sense, but in the spiritual one. He spent every moment uploading his heart to God. Every prayer, every line of code, every act of kindness, he gave it all away. He lived like his faith wasn't a file to save for later. It was a stream, live, constant, real. He wasn't perfect. He had temptations. He had distractions. But he made a choice every day to log into grace. And now that legacy is eternal. He once wrote, "Sadness is looking at ourselves. Happiness is looking at God." And he lived with that joy, because his eyes weren't fixed on screens, they were fixed on heaven. Carlo Acutis didn't reinvent Catholicism. He simply reminded us of its power. He brought the church into the digital world, not to water it down, but to wake it up. He showed us that saints don't have to wear robes, they can wear hoodies. They don't have to speak Latin, they can speak JavaScript. And they don't have to be from centuries ago, they can be from right now. And maybe, just maybe, you and I are next. And that's the story of Blessed Carlo Acutis, the teenager who turned the internet into a path to heaven. If this inspired you, share it. Let others know that sainthood isn't just for the past, it's for the present, and maybe even the future scrolling through your phone right now. Make sure to subscribe to Southern Gospel for more stories of real faith, real miracles, and real saints that still speak to us today. Until next time, stay rooted in truth.